Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Annie, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Ayatafel, for having me. It's such an honor to be here speaking together with such amazing colleagues. And thank you. So I hope you enjoy my presentation. Let me share.
That's
Okay,
right.
thank you very
Great.
much. Great. Okay, so this is Lessons That Matter, helping teens navigate consent, identity, and relationships. I am Estefanía Ferrero. My pronouns are she and her, and I am from Argentina. So let's get started. So a little bit about me so that you know where this information will be coming from. As Annie was pointing out, I'm an English school teacher and also lecturer. I hold a degree in interpreting and I am specializing in comprehensive sexuality education, as well as genders, feminisms, and human rights. So a little bit about the agenda so that you know what we're going to be saying. First of all, why, right? Why consent? Why identity? Why relationships in our English class? The reason behind. Then we're going to go over some concrete strategies so that you can take away for you to apply next Monday, tomorrow in your class. Concrete ideas and resources, strategies for you to integrate consent, identity, and relationships with our curricular contents and competences we must teach. Finally, some reflection, some food for thought on our everyday interactions as well as our role as educators. We will see why consent, identity, and relationships matter in every interaction we have. And of course, some feedback and time for questions and answers. Okay, so I hope you're ready. I will rush a bit because there's a lot to be said, but don't worry, you can write and I can share my presentation afterwards. I would be delighted, so feel free. And here we go, right? Today we're discussing real teachers, real classrooms, practical solutions for today's young learners and teens challenges. So one of the main problems that we have noticed has to do with engagement, with motivation, and with the connection to topics that mold, that shape teens' lives. Those things seem to be missing, right? Those things are sometimes hard to achieve, right? So we see that our students disconnect, are not engaged, or sometimes we see that there isn't really a connection with the topics from the book and their lives, or even sometimes they don't seem motivated with the projects we add. So the idea is to introduce consent, identity, relationships, and equity, of course, so that we can create further motivation, engagement, taking into account that these are topics that are present in their lives. Not only that, though, these are contents and also values and skills that have to do with empowering them with fundamental tools, with critical thinking tools, decision-making tools, citizenship skills, and at the end of the day, life skills. So not only will they be engaged, hopefully, taking into account that these are topics that they encounter every day, but also they would be better equipped to make better decisions and to become better people, better citizens, better critical thinkers. So this is the idea. As for the pedagogical framework, we're going to be working from critical pedagogies. We're going to be taking into account Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks' works and concepts connected to social justice, critical consciousness, and the practice of freedom. So those are the main, this is the main framework that will guide our pedagogical work. Now, according to Maguire, who is a specialized sex educator, consent is present in all our interpersonal interactions. It's present in all our relationships. Perhaps when we say consent, the first thing that comes to mind has to do with sexual or romantic contact and interactions. Now, of course, consent is a must for those, and in fact, and this is sensitive, but it is the fine line that makes sex differ from rape and abuse. However, consent is not only present in sexual or romantic interactions, but actually in all our relationships, in all our interactions with others. That's why Macquarie states that it has to do with everything from how we communicate with each other and how we approach each other. So this is the first thing we need to clarify. Consent is present everywhere. And perhaps interactions that we wouldn't associate with these concepts are actually intertwined and related. And we will see why. According to Macquarie, consent is above all respect for the dignity, personhood, and well-being of every living thing. Now, consent education is about, here again, teaching values and life skills. So it's not only English, and it's not only our English competences, which are of course fundamental, but together with them, alongside with them, we're going to be empowering our students with values, attitudes, and skills that will prove useful for their lives. Now, why at school, right? Well, this has to do with achieving one of the Sustainable Development Goals, number 4, inclusive and quality education, as well as goal number 5, achieving gender equality, right? Equity will be deeply connected. And according to the WHO and PAHO, the role of education is fundamental in starting to create or starting to plant these seeds in order to achieve such important goals. Now, according to the UN, the right to comprehensive sexuality education is a human right itself. And comprehensive sexuality education is a process of teaching and learning about the cognitive, emotional, physical, and social aspects of sexuality. So, as you can see, sexuality is a very broad concept that includes much more than biology. We're going to be talking about these other important aspects that make it up. In fact, according to UNESCO, and we have the definition of sexuality in this broad and comprehensive way. Sexuality is defined as a core dimension of being human, which includes the understanding of and relationship to the human body, of course, emotional attachment and love, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, sexual intimacy, pleasure, and reproduction. Sexuality is complex and includes biological, social, psychological, spiritual, religious, political, legal, historic, ethical, and cultural dimensions that evolve over a lifespan. So again, we see how sexuality is present in all these areas, spanning across our lifespan. So why at school? Again, going back to Maguire, one of the perfect places for consent education to begin and to be nurtured is in the classroom, right? Because in the classroom is the place where we're going to be touching all these areas that we mentioned. Schools are at the heart of the journey toward a culture of consent. So here we're aiming at not only class, but a culture of consent. So this is the aim. Now, taking into account what UNESCO states about the fact that sexuality evolves and spans across our whole lifespan, we will need a cross-curricular approach. Of course, as it is lifelong, consent education has to be lifelong as well. Of course, it will depend on our age and our level and the psycho-evolutionary stage our students are in. So it's going to be age appropriate and it's going to differ, right? It's going to be different depending on the level we are. But it needs to be lifelong and it needs to be cross-curricular. Now, as we have said, consent has to do with every single interpersonal interaction. So it needs to be present in every single field, PE, geography, English, and all our classrooms. all our subjects because it is present in every single interpersonal interaction. Now, how are we going to do that? Macquarie suggests, okay, that there is an infusion into the curriculum. It's not that we're going to add these topics because we know that we already have quite a heavy workload and quite a long curriculum to follow. Well, the idea is not to take them as extra or additional contents or skills, but to infuse them, right? To intertwine them, to integrate them into our own English language curriculum. So this is my proposal, the integration of consent, identity, and relationships, topics that will engage students and which are contents belonging to the area of comprehensive sexuality education, but at the same time permeating all other fields, together with our ELT contents and skills. Again, the idea is to teach them together, not to add more contents or skills, but to find a way to mix and to connect whatever we need to teach regarding our contents and competences with those mentioned, with consent, with equity, with relationships and identity. Okay, so now we will see why. Sorry, now we will see how. Right? Now, when it comes to teenagers, and this is just an example, feel free to adapt it, but just, to give you some sort of ideas in terms of strategies. Imagine that what we need to teach has to do with this communicative function, asking for and giving permission, right? So perhaps we're teaching these phrases, can I, may I, do you mind if I? We're talking about permission, duty, obligation, possibility. We're teaching modal verbs, can, can't, should or should, must, mustn't, may, and so on and so forth. Perhaps we're also teaching agreeing and disagreeing, right? So these look like very innocent concepts, right, or contents. And perhaps we're teaching them with traditional or even boring examples. Well, what if we brought examples connected with consent? What if we bring consent into the conversation, right? So we teach them in context. We teach them taking into account whatever they will need to use for their lives. Right? So this is a great opportunity, a great window of opportunity for us to introduce these more complex topics instead of a classic example, right? Or a textbook example. Of course, we can teach those textbook examples, but after that, after we deliver them, we can include consent topics, right? Now, some reading. Now, this is a fantastic acronym, yes, Planned Parenthood has come up with. That is FRIES, and it highlights the main characteristics for consent to really be consent. The fact that it needs to be freely given, for instance, not under the influence or without any coercion or pressure. R for reversible, we can take it back anytime. Enthusiastic, right? It needs to be connected with what we really want to do. And S for specific, right? It's specific and it has to do with a concrete practice, and it is not like something that includes everything, right? So the idea was the following. I created this worksheet with this text from Planned Parenthood. The idea was for students to read an article which I adapted from this website, and then they had a reading comprehension exercise, a true or false, right? So they had some information about what consent is, these characteristics, they worked with the acronym. And here comes this idea that Edelstein proposes, right? That is going from being a mere executor as a teacher, that is to say, just instructing, just executing, just operating, right? I have this book and I just reproduce the instructions there, and that's it. And going towards a role of being an active constructor, right? Being able to build the worksheets that our students need to be able to co-author the book, because we have situated practices. We know what our students need in this context, in this class, in this year, in this particular geographical location. So sometimes our textbooks do not offer exactly what our students need. So what about adding what is not in our textbook, or topics that have been historically excluded, right? Voices that have been systematically excluded. So here comes our constructing abilities, right? Creating worksheets to provide students with the material that is missing. So here you can see the rest of the worksheet, and today with AI, we can adapt this to any level. We may ask AI to create this text for B1, for B2, for, whatever level we are teaching. AI can even create true or false prompts. So the sky is the limit. This could be questions and answers. This could be fill in the gaps. Again, this is just a trigger, right? So this is a great opportunity to do some reading, again, connected with a topic that is fundamental in their lives, and which is in fact their right to be taught. It's something that it's our duty that they, to guarantee that they are receiving these human rights. And of course, afterwards will come some critical questions, right? Because there's no point in just bringing something without really addressing the main topics and checking with students whether these critical points have been discovered or not. So we will create a conversation after the reading connected with power dynamics and identity, right? So we can, of course, depending on the age, and these are just some examples, right? So we can bring these questions for some speaking, for some discussion, right? Can a person really choose freely if they're scared, if they're pressured or embarrassed? Why or why not, right? They can do this in pairs, and then we can have a plenary. It can be a class discussion, right? So here we are talking about more critical implications of consent. In what situations might someone feel that they can't say no, even if they want to, right? So here we are going to be talking about power dynamics and identity, right? Which are some power dynamics that put us in a position where we are more vulnerable to say no, right? And what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, what is an abuse of power, right? How can age, popularity, or authority affect someone's ability to give consent? And here very important conversations should come up, taking into account the asymmetry of power, to see whether we are peers or not, right? How can we make sure the other person truly has a choice, right? Why might someone with less power, because they are younger, because they are a new student, because they are less confident, etc., find it harder to speak up? And here at the same time, we're covering emotional aspects and affectivity. In what ways does the history of oppression or marginalization affect how people understand or feel able to exercise consent, right? And here comes the idea to decolonize this idea of consent and to bring to the table conversations about what we have learned, who has the power, right, to demand something, are we supposed to accept that, right? How can we say no? How our own history of oppression might make us feel that we need to say yes if a person in power or in a position of power asks something, right? And again, this does not only have to do with romantic encounters, but it can be, again, with any interaction we have with another person. So as we can see, we are handling consent, identity, decolonization in this speaking activity. And of course, we can add an intersectional lens and a gender equity perspective, again, with our sustainable development goals in mind. For instance, whose voice is actually heard first? Whose voice is often ignored? Why? Right? So again, whose voices are we listening to? Which voices do we tend to ignore? How might gender expectations influence how people give or refuse consent, right? Perhaps what are girls expected to say, right? What are boys expected to ask or to say, right? And of course, we can ask students, well, are those the only genders, right? Because we should not necessarily move in a binary conversation, right? But understanding how categories such as gender, right, ability, right, race, which is in fact a problematic concept, perhaps we can talk about ethnicities, influence how we manage consent, right? What happens if a girl says yes, right? Or what happens if a girl consents to something, yes? What kind of comments is she likely to receive? Is that fair? Does the same happen with a man, right? Or on the contrary, what happens if a man says no, right? Because there are a lot of prices to pay, right? To confirm this masculinity, right? And so on and so forth. Now, what can we do to balance power and make choices more equal or work towards equity? Right. So again, we bring a topic and we ask critical questions, right? And the important idea is to create a debate, right? To let students have this dialogue, even if we don't have all the answers. It's a very powerful seed we are planting. Moving on with teenagers, we can do a listening activity. There is a very famous video. It's available on YouTube. That is, consent is as simple as tea, and it compares all these characteristics with consent and how you shouldn't force somebody to drink tea if they don't want to, or if they said that they wanted tea last Monday, perhaps they don't want it today. And it's quite ironic because it looks ridiculous, right? And then there's the analogy, right? Well, the same happens with consent, right? So what I did, aided by artificial intelligence, is to create a listening activity, right, out of the video, right? Students can watch the video or you can download the audio. The video is very rich. And I made AI create a summary and I removed some gaps. So it was very easy. And the idea was for them to fill in the gaps with missing words from the listening activity. Of course, after having debated this topic, right? And then a final project, a podcast, right? So my students had to create a podcast in groups, in pairs. They had to hand in, yes, writing, script, and then the recording, and they pretend that they had to pretend to be to teenagers who had this podcast and wanted to explain it. So it was an opportunity for them to speak, to create a product, and to do something memorable. Now, moving on to younger teenagers, imagine, right, we are dealing with talking about past actions, right? We need to teach past actions. We want them to work with this concept. Now, what if we use classic fairy tales or Disney movies, or probably stories, even, we may have many stories that students might have read with some problematic ideas about consent. So after working with talking about past actions, perhaps we can read the story, we can work with past forms, and so on and so forth. And afterwards, we can have a critical conversation, for example, in this case, where there is a prince kissing, right, a princess who is sleeping, right? Snow White and Aurora, right? So here comes some critical questions, right? And Should we kiss somebody who is sleeping? Why? Why not? Why is it important to ask before we touch somebody, even if we think it's a nice thing, right? For example, before giving a hug, right? So this can spark very interesting conversations. Now, for younger learners, imagine that we're working with giving reasons and explaining. So perhaps we're introducing words like because, but, so, right? So perhaps instead of working with our typical examples, I don't know, Peter likes apples, but he doesn't like banana, right? Of course, we can give those examples, but afterwards we can move on to juicy examples introducing these concepts. And for example, we can use this comic strip that is available in this link, and I would be more than happy to share it. So we can have a look at this comic strip. We can give them some context. And so as you can see, we have they look like two friends, right? One of them says, I really like the Fluffy Band's new song, but they are listening to it. But then in the middle of the night, their friend plays it, right? So she says, you said you like this song, right? And the answer is, yeah, but I don't want to listen to it while I'm sleeping, right? So it looks like a very simple example. So we say, okay, she liked the song, but she didn't want to hear it in the middle of the night. Right? So this can spark very interesting conversations, right? Some critical questions. Did the girl ask? Well, we don't know if it's a girl actually. So did the character ask before playing the music at night? Why is asking important? How does the boy, well, this is quite gendered. Perhaps we should say the character. And what we're doing here is also valuable and counts in class. Imagine I am with my students, and this is something I do all the time. And of course I make mistakes, right? And this idea that they see me questioning myself and opening my mind and being able to other possibilities, right? And learning right on the spot and creating new possibilities together with them is really valuable. So this is also important because sometimes we feel that we need to have all the answers or we need to be correct all the time, right? But especially when talking about comprehensive sexuality education, we are relearning or actually unlearning and learning, deconstructing and constructing all the time. So this can be very valuable for them. Going back, well, how does the character feel when they, we can use gender neutral pronouns. When they wake up suddenly, we're talking about emotions. Right? We are also developing empathy and identification of emotions. Why? How can we know somebody wants something or not, right? Body language, that also counts, right? Because I can be saying yes, but I'm rigid, I'm crying, or the other way about. What could the character say to explain his boundary kindly? And here boundaries come into play. Setting boundaries, talking about our autonomy. And our freedom, of course. What was the right thing to do before playing the music? What does this comic teach us about saying yes and no, right? And finally, they can do a role play, right? They can act out in groups, different scenes and create a different ending, right? An ending where characters respect each other, right? And find a solution, right? Consenting. Here are other examples. For instance, want to watch Pulp Fiction? Sure, half an hour later. I'm not really liking this. Let's do something else. No, you said you'd watch the movie, so you're staying until it's done. Right? So perhaps students should spot, right, what's wrong, right? Then there's another one. I brought the cards. Now I can teach you poker. Cool. A short time later. Now that I know the rules, I don't think this game is for me. You can't invite me over to play cards and then not want to play cards. I went to all this trouble for you, so you owe me and we are playing. So we can talk about their faces, right? Their body language, and so many other things. We can say why this is problematic. Now, we can see how absurd this sounds, right? Now, it's fundamental because the idea with young learners is to start planting these seeds so that later on, when it is age appropriate to discuss romantic and sexual encounters, they will have the concept of consent already mastered. So they can apply it because it starts with these interactions, right? Here, Lauren says, "How ridiculous!" Right? It's fantastic, and many students. I have worked with this comic with younger learners, but also with secondary school students, and it's fantastic because they find it extremely ridiculous. But then they make this analogy and they say things like, hey, but this is the same when it comes into consent in perhaps in romantic relationships, and we don't see it and we don't react this way. Nobody says how ridiculous, right? Sometimes, I mean, what we hear in the media, right? News, right? Oh, thank you so much. This is so kind. Yada Asuman, sorry if I am mispronouncing. Thank you so much. That's very kind. Um, okay, so there are many ways we can work with this comic strip. And as I said before, also thinking about our everyday interactions. We have already worked with some curricular contents, and these are just some examples. My idea is to give you ideas and to trigger you, to inspire you, hopefully, to come up with many ways where you can connect whatever you need to teach, right, with these concepts, right? Now, remember that we have worked with the perhaps explicit curriculum, but we also have the hidden one. So our everyday interactions will teach students much more than we think. So it's fantastic that we model consent with students as well, as McQuire points out. So asking, for example, if it is a good time to discuss a topic that we know might be sensitive, right? Minding personal, physical, and emotional space, right? Perhaps with physical space, it's more obvious or more evident, but emotional space as well, right? If a student does not want to deal with something, right? I don't know, they're crying and they don't want to talk about it. Perhaps they're, oh, don't cry, or what's wrong? And well, perhaps what they need is some space, of course, being there and checking, right? But it's allowing them to have their moment. Asking before giving a hug, and here I need to clarify something. I am Argentinian, and here in Argentina, it is very common to hug our students. It's something cultural. We're very affectionate, and in many schools, this is something that happens all the time. But I know that, of course, this does not happen in all cultures. However, we need to ask, or even before, right, giving a pat, right, working with proximity, right? We should always be mindful. Of course, also not to expose ourselves, but also modeling consent. Checking when body language and words do not match up, right? Because perhaps they are like, yes, but they are crying, or yes, but they seem very rigid, right? So teaching them that body language also communicates. Problematizing what they might take as jokes or humor, when perhaps they learn this concept, they start using it all the time for jokes. And I didn't consent to give you my sharpener. I'm like, hey, why would we take this as a joke, right? Why do you think that's funny, right? I've also seen this with the term bullying in Argentina. They are bullying me, and okay, it's used very lightly, and actually it's a very serious topic. And also observing and intervening, right? When of course there's a situation taking place where there's no consent. And it can be as simple as, for example, a student grabbing another student's toy without permission, right? So all our interactions and all our classes, and I mean, not only in the classroom, this can happen in the hall, this can happen, right, in the playground, are opportunities for us to teach consent. And this has to do with rethinking relationships, right, and learning, overturning and reimagining, says McQuire, all our interpersonal communication and contact, right? So even if in our culture we don't give hugs to students, okay, what if I have a colleague or a friend and students see me ask before I give them a hug, right? So everything teaches, right? And modeling healthy relationships. These are all seeds for equal, non-discriminatory, and non-violent relationships, right? McQuire says that this has to do with changing the dynamics that are the roots leading to dating and gender-based violence. We know this is a worldwide concern, and there are alarming numbers concerning dating and gender-based violence, especially towards women and feminized identities. So changing these messages, changing the way we interact will set the right roots to change much bigger problems. But remember that these big systematic and structural problems like gender-based violence begin with social and cultural messages, social and cultural values and attitudes. Oh, thank you. Oteng, Gilbert, Kabila, sorry for my probably terrible pronunciation. Comments, thank you. All right, and in fact, it's not only McQuire. I mean, according to the UN CEDAW, education plays a fundamental and key role in changing these social norms, these social and cultural attitudes that eventually lead to gender-based violence. Because when we talk about gender-based violence and unhealthy and violent relationships, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. And below, we have this less explicit, more subtle, sometimes invisible attitudes, comments, and actions that are actually what work as the foundation. So we have a privileged role in our classroom to start challenging that. So again, the concept that I brought earlier, this has to do with building cultures, not just classes of consent. And some food for thought, because we started talking about, okay, engaging students, right? Or motivating students, or bringing topics that shape their lives. That's all very well. And of course, this is why we're here, right? This is the main topic of the conference. But let's be honest, this is not only to motivate. I mean, this is the plus, if we may. This is our duty as educators, because we are not only instructing them so that they learn a language. We are teaching people, right? And we have an ethical, right, duty to empower them with these tools for life, and to create a violence-free world. So let me say that this is not just to motivate or to engage students. If they are engaged and motivated, well, that's fantastic. But let's not forget that it is our duty and that we are fulfilling our role, right? Remember that students are change agents, and they are the ones that are going to create a more inclusive, fair, free, and equitable world. So let's co-build these tools with them. Let's give them the opportunity, right, to co-build these skills together. So as I always say, thank you, Annie, as I always say, we're teaching a language, but what are we doing with that language, right? Whose voice are we using? Whose voice are we ignoring? Which topics are we teaching? Which topics are we ignoring? And remember that when we don't talk about the topic, then we are teaching about the topic, and we are giving a very powerful and dangerous message. We're saying that is not important. We're saying that that is not talked about, that is taboo. And we are perpetuating oppression. Because if we don't do anything, yes, then we are in a way contributing to it. So remember, we are teaching language, but what are we doing with that language? What are students going to do with our language? What are they going to use it for? Right? So we are not only teaching them to talk about past actions, right? We are not only teaching them how to agree. Okay, we are teaching them to use language critically, to have the tools to say, to speak up when something is wrong, to defend their ideas, right? And as Paulo Freire once said, education doesn't change the world, education changes people. And people change the world. And Annie says, what is not mentioned doesn't exist. Thank you so much, Annie. That's so true. And that's so painful and sad, right? So let's start using language to mention, right, the topics that exist, but that have been historically and systematically muted or silenced, right? We have that power and we have that privilege. Teachers inspire, says Sophia. Thank you, Sophia. They do. So we need to be aware, right, of that power we have. So I guess we have some minutes for questions and feedback. Here is the bibliography. Feel free, right, to send me an email, to follow me on LinkedIn, right? Let's keep building comprehensive sexuality education together. I would love to hear your views. Or if you are struggling with a topic you would like to connect, feel free. Hey, Steffi, I want to teach this. I'm not really sure. I would be more than honored to help you or to build it together, to share my presentation on the whole worksheets. Feel free. Annie says, my motto, we don't teach English, we teach people. That's so true. Thank you, Annie. Definitely. We cannot forget that. Sometimes we are so overworked and we have so much to do and the curriculum to follow and our bosses and so on. But we teach people at the end of the day. Much inspiring session. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Julieta, Anastasia. Thank you, Julieta. It is, yes, Julieta says that ESI, that sexuality education is really important in Argentina. In Argentina, we have a law. Thankfully, of course, there are many challenges. I know this is not the reality all around the world. But this is very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria, Amara, Ryan, Maria, thank you so much. Misa, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Estefanía. It's been a wonderful session. Lots of food for thought. Very inspiring. And yeah, I think that it's a very, very important aspect of education that we need to be very much aware of. Right. And yeah, Yada says language is a powerful tool in all our real life experiences, so it must be used with care to avoid harming others. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Language and power.
Yeah, that's right. Paulo Freire spoke about the power of words. And we have to teach our students not just to use to see the world, but to see the words and how the words impact lives. Yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Estefanía.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Session.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.